the 28th of March, the Ukraine Media Center is operating. Your anchor is Svetlana Cheparenko. We are talking this morning about the return of the abducted children abducted by Russia and the way the international community can affect the stepping up of this process. Kateryna Rashevska is a PhD in international law and the expert at the Regional Center for Human Rights. Welcome, ma'am. We perhaps will start with the database of the abducted Ukrainian children. For a long time, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know whether the database existed or it was deleted. Your non-governmental organization has been operating with it for 3 years' time. Is it still existing? Is it still serving its purpose? I can reassure you that the database of our NGO has not been deleted. It's still alive and kicking. The database that we've been talking about for a couple of weeks now is a database that has been discussed for a long time. For some reason, we heard about it either in a distorted way over these 2 scandalous weeks, or it was not mentioned at all. We have the number of 19,500 children. This is the Ukrainian figures. The Ministry of Justice is working with that number. We want to verify the data. We should be aware that these children, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, are in custody for 3 years now. Those children that had been abducted from the Crimea are now of full age, and we have to filter that list out. But we have to be aware that 19,000 is a figure that we have. We have figures from other NGOs, and there are a couple of databases. One is about deportation and enforced disappearances, and the so-called abducted children for the re-education. The Yale Humanitarian Laboratory mentioned 6,000 children. Those children that were given over to Russian families, we know about 300 of them. When we talk about the figure of north of 19,000, they include these children. Part of them have not been accounted for because they had become orphans. And I challenged myself, who are these more than 30,000 children? In different ways, the international advocacy, we were talking about, what is it, 20,000? Is it too much? Is it too little? And voila, we have come up with a 30,000 children. Now, the source of that perhaps should come from the authors. The Yale Humanitarian Laboratory head, Natalia Navin, mentioned in his interview that 19,549 children are the Ukrainian figure. If that list is still available, yes. And then we know about the thousands of children that have been taken to the re-education camps. The gentleman mentioned that these children did exist. We're talking about the period since the beginning of the war until March 2023. No one has the access to the territories where these re-education camps are located. I called on you to be very critical when we read about such news. Of course, it's a painful history of the deported children. The state that has had potentially that and is that list and is a master of that list. Of course, the Russian aggression and the armed conflict is part and parcel of the inner political fighting. And of course, abducted children have been exploited here. We hear the message that let's talk about the good things. The United States supports the idea of returning. It's a trust-building measure between Russia and Ukraine. When the database are concerned, we should be aware that identifying the children is very difficult to do, but the main barrier is the Russian Federation. Because as usual, we hear the question, we talk about a register, let us work more and more actively. Let's have those children returned. Russia will not respond. Let's talk about the good things, about trust building. Michael Waltz mentioned that he considered that the fact that children would be returned to Ukraine is a step towards trust building. Do you think this can be a leverage in the negotiations? I will tell you more. For a long time, it has been one of the main messages that we have been advocated at our center for general understanding. Since the end of 2022 until later 2024, the framework for the negotiations looks as follows. We will set up something in general. We will fix it, and then the children and the civilians that had been held in custody against the law will start. But our message was, how can you trust the Russian Federation that this country will not stage the war again, that country was going to make up for all the damage and losses? How can you trust a country that is constantly in breach with the international humanitarian law, and a country that does not live up to its commitments as an occupying force, including the Ukrainian children? We suggested that we should start with the little steps in international relations. That's called, with a reference to children, baby diplomatic steps. In general, we are talking about humanitarian realms here. Now we are talking about perhaps the fact that we should stop firing at each other, and then we will discuss long-term things. Our vision is, once the Russian Federation has demonstrated that they demand the list of the deported children from Ukraine, whereas it is committed, it must be responsible for providing such lists. And then they will make sure that neither children nor witnesses that would witness later on against the Russian Federation. We should be aware that Russia is acting in goodwill. The order that we see today, unfortunately, it's a good thing that we have had more than 1,100 children returned. But let us talk about percentage. How many children are still there? There are a lot of them. If the situation stays as it is, we will fail in this ambitious goal. To reiterate, because we are talking about the brokers' country, well, it seems to be working, but we should be aware that the Russian Federation doesn't look like a lady who dictates all the conditions and we are all complying. Perhaps we should be talking about a very specific category of people. We're talking about children. Of course, we will translate all the documents into Russian because they claim they can't understand the Ukrainian language. But the logic is this. The Russian Federation has deported and has abducted children. It must commit to returning them home. Now, this is not the only matter to be discussed by the Russian Federation and Ukraine at the negotiation table. We should be very realistic. For some time, part of Ukraine will be occupied, meaning that the Russian Federation must comply with the humanitarian international law. In general, how do you think realistic it looks that Russia is likely to return those children? For them, it seems that they treat the Ukrainian abducted children as a capital. children that are brought up in an environment, a cultural and political environment that fits their purposes. We should be aware that one of the positive aspects is the initiatives by Ukraine. Every time these technical consultations take place, or whatever the proper name will be, Ukrainian part is always raising the issue. This is our vision of peace. This is the vision of peace, not only by Ukraine, but including the countries of the so-called global South. The African countries' representatives were visiting here and visiting Russia. The message being that without children being returned, it's difficult to imagine a just, long-lasting peace. Barring such circumstances, part of the population will feel that they are unjustly treated, and this will bring up the negative feelings and the sentiment of revanchism. The message being, all children must be returned. Let us look at the Russian Federation. What is going on there in terms of the of Ukrainian abducted children? Maria Lvova-Belova stated that she has done or is planning to transfer some children. Where and to whom we don't know. She mentioned 300 children and stressing out that all these children were not deported or forcefully transferred, but they don't have, according to her claim, more than 300 children. We are talking about one database is 30,000. We are talking about more than 19,000 children. Then Lvova-Belova goes to the occupied territories of Ukraine, and we see how children are being adopted. She visits children's institutions, and she says these children should be accommodated. Of course, if we can return these children to their biological parents, let's do that. And then Inna Shvenk is the representative and the commissioner for children at the Lugansk People's Republic. She said that we have transferred a couple of thousand of children to Russia. You see, these figures don't add up. And these children, almost 90,000 of them, there is no goodwill to cooperate, has never been there and will never be there. What do we have to do? We have to understand that Russians understand two things, force and pressure. In this area, we must continue with sanctions, meaning that in this realm, the investigations must be going on at the International Criminal Court. Perhaps we say that we will apply Article 16 from Rome statutes. No, it cannot be, because children are still under the control of the Russian Federation. When we talk about the issue whether there is a room for some compromise or other things, categorically no. Children are still under the control of Russia as a result of international crime. We must defend our ground. We must say very clearly and demand the maximum about at least some percentage of the returned children. In Russia, as far as I see, they manipulate this area, and they have come up with the ways how to distort the truth. Under the circumstances, we seem to be arguing now who is the aggressor, who invaded whom. We should make sure that the truth is not bent and that the Russian narratives are not popularized internationally. More than 1,000 children have come home. What is the dynamics there? We should be aware that this number does not include children who made back on their own from the occupied territories. Some of them are children of full legal age. That is to say, they have become of full age in the occupation, yes, and they were waiting until that time, and through the territory of Belarus, they made it to Ukraine. We don't include them, but the number of children is very high. The positive dynamics is there. More and more young Ukrainians, the former children who were not of legal age under the occupation environment, even those who have lived in the captivity for 11 years, they have showed the tendency to come to Ukraine for a higher education. And the figure in 2023 was 23,000 of them. That is to say, the dynamics is positive. As for the forcefully replaced children, Ukraine is doing all it can, including creating the atmosphere of pressure and advocacy to return the very young kids from the orphanages in different Ukrainian cities, and children whose parents have been deprived of their parents' rights. There is a lot of manipulation here. Russia is changing their own legislation when biological parents will never see their children, let alone the fact that unlike European countries, and I will footnote here that the situation there is not ideal, but at least the adopting parents here in Ukraine or elsewhere have the access to online platforms to see who these children are and to make sure that these Ukrainian families adopt children. It's not possible in Russia at all. And Russia will say these children don't want to go back because they don't know the person who has come to take them back. How can they know these children? This is my assumption that they return to the United Nations bodies as a narrative campaign with the narrative that these children are doing quite good and they're happy in Russia. And this campaign has been going on for a number of years now. As for the children who are in need of reunification with their families, I don't know whether we should be talking about negative or positive trends, but the trend is there. Once we see a kid, two kids, or a group of them, with the help of the NGO and the government bodies, with the participation of the International Coalition for Return of Children, this tendency seems to be sustainable, and I wish it were that way for some time, and even reinvigorated. But there are some specific categories of children that should be discussed in the first place along the negotiations, if not parties don't meet face-to-face, then through the brokering state. Do you think this is a sustainable trend? We are still waiting for some specific steps from South Africa, a country that seems to have been willing to cooperate. Their readiness as a regional, shall I say, leader in the African continent and the representatives of the global South, it's not that bad, at least to keep that point on the international agenda, saying that this is not the initiative perverted by the West. It's also, the message should be, is the initiative of the global South. As for the participation of Qatar or the Vatican, we don't categorize these children that I have mentioned. Some of children came back with the help of the Holy See or the Qataris. I think we should have some statistics to reflect the policies of Russia. Belova mentioned that 98 children were reunified with their families in Ukraine due to the Qatari initiative, I think it's a too small a figure. As for the Holy See, they come in when, for example, a kid was detained at the Russian border. They wouldn't allow that kid to enter the Ukrainian territory. The situation is very complex. This is where the Vatican kicks in. As for the role of the Vatican, early this year there was a sad event when a major forum was held at the initiative of the Holy See dedicated to the protection of children's rights, including the armed conflict. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian representative wasn't there. The Ukrainian children then were not discussed. The Holy See claimed that they're committed to the idea of the children being returned. Let me tell you that before that event, the Pope met the Ukrainian community, Ukrainian children online. That is to say, the Ukrainian children were heard. The Pope knows what's going on. He can't say that I didn't know that children were deported. No such things will ever happen, but we should be aware of who is doing what. We can assume now that the support is politically engaged. This is where the parties get some contact, and we're talking about the guarantees of the return of the children. The Qatar initiative implies money. We are talking integration of these children as well, but we must be aware and appreciate the actions of our friends. That would be very relevant. Colleagues, do you have questions, please? Will you tell us, you mentioned the Yale database
information, but I tell them a lot of the information was gathered here. Can you kind of explain what you know about the current situation with applied data for the children that have been kidnapped? Дуже дякую.
So as for this database, I was trying to explain during the first round of questions about numbers and also about information itself. And I would like to tell, of course, I am not a part of the Yale Humanitarian Laboratory in order to explain all the details. Only like people from this organization can do it. But what I would like to highlight is that official representatives of the United States, they confirmed that the database still exist, that they have access to this database, and also that they constantly support the efforts to return Ukrainian children. And as the United States are members of the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children, I really believe that they will transfer if they didn't do it. So they will transfer all the information to the competent bodies of Ukraine in order to return children, because you know, it is a little bit strange when some information is just collected and not transferred in order to help children and to help children to be returned to their biological families or to just to the territory of Ukraine. So it's just the collection of information for the collection for the process. So I would like to highlight one more time that when we see such news, we should be critical. And we should understand that sometimes we should just wait for several days in order to receive some additional explanations from the official parts, Ukraine and the United States, or from the representatives of this Yale Humanitarian Laboratory in order just to be more, you know, be more sure that everything will be okay. And also, one more time, 19,546 children, they are now in the Ukrainian database and they still be under Russian control. So even if we are operating with this personal information, names and surnames, so we can continue our efforts to repatriate these children, and it will not harm like the current dynamics, because the main problem is the Russian Federation. But of course, no discussions may be about deleting something, some personal data of minor citizens of foreign state.
Just a second. Microphone.
Last part of that question was when we had the children that were called sort of wards of the state from before full-scale invasion. How does Ukrainian government or lawyers know which children were in that system? Because we know families who would be looking for, but we've discussed that the country was responsible for children who were in government, supervision before there. So how do people learn, what happened with those children, in particular in that category?
So as for the status children, so state children, orphans, and children deprived of parental care, some part of them, they were in boarding institutions, and that is why they are in our national registers. And of course, Russians, they were not even trying to hide this crime. And sometimes we even know where are our children now. For example, children from this Kherson regional child home, they are in Simferopol in occupied Crimea. But unfortunately, according to declaration of the occupation authorities, 20 children from this group, so from 48 children, they were already transferred to the Russian foster families. This is like one example, but we should also understand that some part of these children, orphans, and children deprived of parental care, they were in Ukrainian foster families in a very specific form of foster care, like this family care home, like family foster home. And unfortunately, sometimes we are documenting cases where foster parents why like this in this context, because they are not acting in child best interest, and that is why we can raise the question whether they still be the legal representatives. But some of them, they are now collaborators. Even we had one case when these families, they confirmed the transfer of their Ukrainian children to Russian foster families for one more time. So, but this is not, something very frequent. This is sporadic cases, but even when we are talking about children orphans and children deprived of parental care, this is not a unique, like a very, this is no one group. These are several groups with different legal situations. So we should understand. With some families, these foster families, Ukrainian authorities, they keep contact. So we understand where our children, whether these parents still be pro-Ukrainian or, for example, they are Russian collaborators. And of course, all efforts are made in order to return these children under Ukrainian control. We had cases where families from occupation, they crossed this front line, and now they are under Ukrainian control.
Lorenzo, your question, please.
Thank you. It's very interesting. It's one of the first time that I hear some serious data, because the numbers sometimes are very confusing. My name is Lorenzo Cremeri from the Italian daily Corriere della Sera. Dr. Kateryna, can you be a little more specific? These 19,549 children, six. So these are according with the Ukrainian data. Then you mentioned the 30,000 are referring to the American data, right? The Yale, okay. So there is 10,000, I mean, the number is 10,000 difference. How come? Why you have this number, and how do you explain it? And can you be a little more specific about this 19,000, than the number that you have? Are they all from Crimea, from Donbass? Can you be more specific about the origin? And then I have another question about the Vatican.
So it is a question, and frankly speaking, I should tell that there are also other numbers like 1,600,000 children under Russian control. Also number declared by the Russian state, like more than 700,000 children who crossed the border of the Russian Federation. So the numbers are totally different, but like, maybe not very, you can hear this very often, but all the numbers are true. 19,546. This is a number of children in the Ukrainian register. Among them, approximately 4,000 children are orphans and children deprived of parental care. Other children, they are, for example, children of Ukrainian military, children who, for example, lost their parents during these hostilities, children who were separated with their family members because they were detained during the filtration process, and so on and so forth. When we are talking about this number, 30,000 children voiced by the American part, we should understand that Nathaniel told 10-12,000 children. These are children who were transferred, who were displaced to the re-education camps. And this is also the truth. As for 2023-2024, approximately 10,000 children we have managed to document from open sources, children who were in re-education camps. And as I have already mentioned, it is not very easy to confirm that all children were returned to their families, were returned to the Ukrainian occupied territories. And that is why they added these 10-12,000 to the 19,546, because they are not sure that all children were returned. As for other higher numbers, these more than 1 million, these are children in occupation, so they were not deported, forcibly transferred, but they are under the constant risk to be deported. And as for the Russian number, they have just calculated the number of children who really transferred the border of the Russian Federation, but it doesn't mean that these children were not deported. Even if they cross the border together with their parents, deportation may be with, like, you know, together with your blood relatives, if we have this element of coercion.
Another question, and I have a third one, and I finished. In your own words, can you tell us how do you consider the decision by the Trump administration to cut the financial support to the program, to the children, to the Ukrainian children? What are the main consequences, in few words? Thank you.
So this is the question of the internal policy of the sovereign state, and that is why I am not able to comment. I am not a good person. But when we are talking about the impact of this policy and also of the negative consequences, of course, unfortunately, it may harm and it will harm the situation of Ukrainian children. Because first of all, we are talking about the process of identification of children, and we still have this need to identify more children abducted by Russians. Secondly, we are talking about very good, excellent analytical work of the experts of these organizations who faced this cutting. Also, we are talking about the advocacy efforts, because when all these reports were issued, we had conferences at the highest level, we had even meetings of the United Nations Security Council, and when we are just stopping to speak about this problem, unfortunately, Russians feel that there will be no international accountability, there will be no future discussions about the repatriation of children, and of course, it is harming the situation even with current dynamics of the deportation. What I would like to highlight, that Ukrainian children still be deported by Russians. Of course, this is not the same like it was during first months of the full-scale invasion, but the process is ongoing, and we should understand that when we have some problems with operational work of very good non-governmental organizations who are dealing with this issue, we face very difficulties with repatriation of these kids, with reintegration, because also these efforts were supported, but also with keeping attention to this issue at the international level.
Sorry, can you also, according with your data, I'm talking about Ukrainian data now, how many children came back with repatriation program, exchange, with to also to the mediation of Qatar and the Vatican? Please, I didn't get the numbers. Can you tell us the number of children who came back through Qatar mediation and the Vatican? Because in Italy there are a lot of criticism about this. Apparently the Vatican is not very effective.
So as for the total number, it is 1,243, 1243. Yes, and you can see this number at the official website of the Bring Kids Back UA initiative. And this number is constantly renewed, so you can see it. As for the number of children returned through the efforts of the specific country mediator, unfortunately I can't tell, because Ukraine is not collecting these statistics. So they are not dividing children who were returned through the mediation of Qatar, who were returned through the mediation of Vatican. And frankly speaking, sometimes there were children who were returned like thanks for both. Because firstly, Qatar was trying to transfer the list with the name and surname of this child. Then Vatican intervened in order to help to mediate the process of repatriation. As a piece of example, this is return of Bogdan from Mariupol, who were under Russian control in Russian foster family. He was trying to escape from Russia. It was without any success. And then the process of mediation in order to return Bogdan started, and both parts participated, both states. Unfortunately, we can see only numbers provided by the Russian side, and Maria Lvova-Belova told that through Qatar, only 98 children were returned as for today. But as I have already mentioned, I don't trust this number because it is too low.
Дякую. Можливо, є ще запитання в журналістів?
Do we have more questions from the journalists? In such a case, yes, we do have a question.
To Ukraine, as you said, that have come of age and have moved back. What kind of information have they given you that's potentially useful in the search of the other children that have moved?
This is a very good question because, yes, we are interviewing children during the process of preparing communications, individual complaints to the United Nations Human Rights Committee in order to try to restore the rights of these children and also to gain justice for them. And during the process of interviewing them, but also their legal representatives, like parents, guardians, some children, they are mentioning other children who may be possibly deported. As a piece of example, we had a case of deportation of one girl together with her mother from Mariupol by Russians, deportation from Mariupol to Taganrog. This child was accompanied by her mother, but of course we had elements of the deportation. When we were interviewing this girl, she told that in my class in school there were two girls who were from the family, not in a very good conditions. So they had some problems also with Ukrainian guardianship authorities, but they still be in this family just in order, because Ukraine as a state was trying to help to these parents to save their parental rights. But after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the contacts with these girls was lost, and till today it was not renewed. And that is why this girl interviewed by us, she suggested that maybe these girls were deported by Russians. Unfortunately, Ukrainian side also doesn't have the information about these children, and it is also a sign and a confirmation that not 19,546 children were deported, but more, because there are such cases. And of course, these girls, they were not in registers of Ukraine because they were not orphans, they were not children deprived of parental care, but they were under monitoring of guardianship authorities. And unfortunately, it is not now easy to establish some contacts with them.
One more question, yeah.
Sorry again, it's a very intriguing question. This number, 19,000, is since when? Since the invasion 22 or 2014?
Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, as I know. Because previously, when we are talking about children from the occupied Crimean Peninsula, we are suggesting that approximately 1,000 were deported or forcibly transferred, mostly deported. to the territory of the Russian Federation. They were sent to the Russian foster families under several programs, like program Train of Hope, when Russian foster families came to the occupied territories, mostly to the territory of the occupied Crimean Peninsula, but unfortunately there were also cases when children were deported from occupied Donbass. And this foster care was established and children were sent to Russian parents, and we know situations, we know concrete children who still be in these Russian families. They are raised like Russian patriots. They don't know that Crimea is not Russia, that Crimea is occupied, and that they were abducted, they were deported, and they should be returned to the territory of Ukraine. The question of repatriation of these children is very hard because there are different international legal regimes regulating this situation, and we should establish the best interest of these children and their will in order to decide whether to return them or, unfortunately, to just to try to legalize their stay in these Russian families.
Дякую, пані Катерино, за ваші, як завжди, детальні відповіді.
Thank you, ma'am. As always, it's been very detailed and interesting. We'll be talking about the abducted Ukrainian children as a step towards peace. We will resume our work at 1200. We'll be talking about the way we should behave when we are being shelled and bombed. Stay tuned.